StoryCode, I love StoryCode, and the lovely part about it is that it brings together two of my passions, which are coding and like sort of more designy kind of way of telling stories, and video and personal storytelling. And that's kind of what has been everything that I've done in my career, or that I've tried to drive towards. And if it gives you an idea, I work as a coder, but also as a videographer. I spent 3 years as a videographer for the Wall Street Journal, and then I went into data journalism for Planet Money, and now I do a lot of that for Al Jazeera. And I am kind of, I'm hoping or wanting to become the incarnation of what StoryCode embodies, so kind of like driven by my immigrant fear of doom, of imminent doom. I've kind of learned every skill I need to survive, and learned every skill in this industry, and I've always gone where the money was, i.e. where the jobs were, so I'm a bit of an everything, and I also teach. So this presentation, if you get a little bored, since we have kind of a smaller circle, feel free to shout at me, to tell me to stop, or ask questions or so, or if you have rotten tomatoes, throw them at me. I can dodge them probably. Anyhow, so today we're going to talk about loving long distance, which was kind of a pet project that became a work project, which kind of surprised me because it was very personal from the beginning. The project looks at how people bridge distances after having been separated through political or socioeconomic or other circumstances. And the idea is to make you look at these issues, things like war or poverty, the criminal justice system, political movements, in a kind of different way. So oftentimes people affected by these issues in media are portrayed as victims or perpetrators. And this series tries, or at least through the series, I try to look at people in three-dimensional ways. Like, how are they navigating interpersonal relationships in kind of shitty situations? And hopefully through their stories, through a love story or the story of a parent and their child, you can maybe use that as a Trojan horse to get other people to care about issues that we usually only hear about when people wag their finger at you with their journalism, right? And so loving long distance relationships are kind of perfect for that. They offer this treasure trove of information for this kind of storytelling, right? There are these narratives that you spin between one person and another to maintain the love between one person and another. And it can be really, really intimate, and a very intimate way of understanding political issues. And we started this by looking at a personal story. This is an excerpt from a story about the Vietnam War. My parents, they grew up in Saigon, and they were separated by the war. My father was kind of like this dangly 18-year-old student in Vietnam in Saigon, and he was like, holy crap, everyone who's failing school is being recruited, and then they die out in the fields because they're fighting a pretty unfair war, unjust war. And so he decided to become a student in Germany. But as any boy at age 17, 18, he also had a crush on someone. He had never talked to her before. And so after he left, and like after he moved 5,000 miles away, he decided to start writing her letters. And so over 9 years, he started wooing her. And over the course of 9 years, they actually fell in love through letters. And there are some really boring things that they talked about in these letters. There are some pretty like hefty things they talked about in these letters, like how crime rose during the Vietnam War, or what it was like to be an immigrant in a new country, like Germany, where he barely spoke the language. And so what we were able to do was to retrieve 66 surviving pages of this 9-year-long letter exchange, translated them, and mined them for a short documentary. And I'm gonna play a little clip of that.
Thì viết cái thiệp chúc Tết Asmaline Glückwunschkarte. Bác cũng hơi ngạc nhiên, tại bác nói má không biết nhận được cái thơ muốn làm quen như vậy thì, nhưng mà bác thấy thôi ok, bác cũng thấy tức là bác cũng có cái hơi có cái good I trust, thành ra bác mới ok, bác accepted mấy chữ thơ. Saigon, ngày 17 tháng 12 1972, anh Liêm. Lộ vừa nhận được thiệp của anh. Thú thật với anh, Lộ ngạc nhiên và cảm động không ít khi nhận được nó. Rồi chẳng biết nói gì hơn là chân thành gửi đến anh những câu cảm ơn.
Từ đó cái bắt đầu viết thư qua viết thư lại.
Nói chuyện Tết, nói chuyện đời sống ở bên Đức, lung tung. Giờ này bên ấy chắc tuyết rơi nhiều lắm phải không anh? Lùa tưởng tượng đến cảnh vật tuyết phủ trắng xóa hết mọi nơi, chắc tuyệt diệu lắm phải không anh Liêm?
Lúc sáng này có rơi tuyết độ 5 phút, chưa dưới 0 độ nên không đóng lại. Ngoài phố họ đã giăng đèn, đầy đèn màu. 90% trong những ngày Giáng sinh thì phố chết ngõm chứ khó hy vọng tìm được chuyện vui. Nhưng thôi buồn đành chịu.
À anh Liêm nhớ cho Lụa xin tấm ảnh tuyết rơi nhé.
Okay. And so we built this little website and we had this video there, but there were also a little bit of text and looking into how their lives intersected with the war through a timeline. But what was interesting to me mostly was that I had 66 pages that I could go through, an archive sort of raw documents looking into how a relationship developed. Nowadays, we have this kind of intimate storytelling that all of us participate in. Facebook collects all of your communications with someone. Who here has actually gone back through their text messages, like with an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend or with someone, and like found something surprising, or like looked back and been like, oh my gosh, that was really sweet, or what the heck was I thinking back then, right? Like these are all narratives that have been captured nowadays. And so instead of just having an archive of letters that I had to go through, we realized that we can find this archive somewhere else, in places like Facebook. And so the next thing that we did was we looked into that kind of storytelling. The next episode that we launched was about Jeff Ringo, and he was a student at NYU when Hong Kong became embroiled in democracy protests, right? And for him, loving his home country and hometown long distance was really difficult because he really wanted to participate in these protests. And at some point, the Hong Kong police decided to tear gas their own citizens, which is the first time that had happened since the British handover of the Hong Kong colony to China. And he couldn't sit still anymore. And so what he did was he found ways of chatting to random people who were in Hong Kong, but also in Sydney, also expats from Hong Kong who were living in London and so on. And in the end, they were able to organize an international global protest movement on Facebook. And here is a small excerpt from that episode.
So we began having Facebook conversations, groups, and then everything had just gone on from there. There isn't really anything like we officially found an organization like that. It's mostly people joining in. Through connections over connections and connections, I was added to a number of different sort of Facebook groups, and we began talking. We began to introduce, each person says, I'm from Vancouver, or I'm from Toronto, I'm from San Francisco, and I'm from New York. So we began to to talk, and Angel was one of the people who were in Hong Kong.
And so, yes, it's kind of creepy that Facebook and Twitter and all these other companies are holding on to this huge repository of all of your communications. But there's also something a little bit fascinating about having your memories exist in the cloud. There's actually a whole book that's about the advantages and disadvantages of not being able to forget anymore. That we've gone from a default of forgetting to a default of remembering, which I find fascinating. And even though corporations and politicians and other companies have started using this data to market things at you, to throw messages at you, there's a lovely way of reclaiming that data by looking at it and by analyzing it and maybe by sieving through it to find interesting stories. And so Jeffrey here, he actually allowed us to look at his data, which is here. It's roughly 100 megabytes worth of just code. And this is like 15,000 lines of code just of chat history. The main conversations between him and this one organizer, Angel Leong, who's one of the main organizers in Hong Kong. For us, the idea was you have this friendship that only exists in a virtual space, but became a refuge for you when you felt like you wanted to participate in a patriotic movement at home, right? And so once we were able to extract that data, we were able to also look into documenting how this movement started. So these are 9 different chat rooms that he joined. And one of the most interesting things that we forget about protest movements is that no, they don't just start with one incident and suddenly everyone is on board. They have this amorphous blob of people coming into one chat room, or like people participating in one gathering and another. And this is echoed through this graphic and through the data that you can sieve through. We found that there were 28,545 messages that he exchanged with Angel and other people. So there were 9 different chat rooms. One that started just with him and this organizer, but then also other ones that were kind of like had 4 other members in it, and or like 5 or 3 and so on. So it was kind of like this amorphous blob until you see that beige line. That became what they now call sort of the Hong Kong Global Solidarity Movement Politburo, which consists of 9 core organizers around the world who chat with one another. And you can see how after the chaos and after all of this stuff happened, first of all, the tear gas prompted people to talk to each other. You can see how the number of messages went up. But then you can also see how it kind of dies down over time. But there's this one core group of people who are still organizing, who are still writing op-eds, who are still participating in these things, and who on the anniversary this year of Tiananmen Square were also putting together a protest movement. And it's also an interesting way of looking into how underground movements continue to simmer, even if physically their manifestations on the streets no longer exist. But this was all just data. And this is all just going through code that already exists that you can harvest from other people. And what I also find interesting in looking through that data and looking through those chats and sieving through them to understand humanity a little bit better is that the way we communicate has changed. Snapchat capitalizes on that. The reason why people want to use Snapchat is because they want to talk in pictures. And pictures usually clog up your memory and so on. A lot of the youngins nowadays are sending each other photos through Snapchat because that's how they communicate. And that's how we communicate with one another. So is there something that we can see when we are looking at how we talk to one another through this data? Maybe we talk in pictures, maybe we talk in emojis, maybe we talk in social jargon or in short speak or so. So let's look at this example. The reporter of the story is actually in the back here, Lisa DeBoat. She's an incredible reporter. I was very lucky to work with her on this. But this is an exchange between a son and a mother. It's kind of sad, right? Like he says kiss, and she's like sad face, and then a little cat. These are actually animated GIFs. Like the cat kisses, and the heart bubbles up, and then like explodes a little, and so on. And it's this mother sending Facebook stickers in form of emoji to her son to express some sort of sadness and tenderness. You can extract it from that, right? She's sad, but she also wants to express love. She's sad, and she also wants to feed him through a donut cat or something. But these are actually chats of this woman. Her name is Thalia Ben Ali, and she lives in Vilvoorde, Belgium. Is that how you pronounce it? Vilvoorde. And her son was recruited by extremists. This is her trying to lure him back after he went to Syria to fight for a group that later joined ISIL. And these were just a few of the roughly 2,000 chats that they exchanged. And this story published last week. We're hoping that maybe we can talk to her again about getting more access to that. But the few chat windows that she revealed just show the anguish of a mother trying to bring back her son. And she just couldn't find the words, and all she found was an emoji, right? And so this entire series is about finding emotions and human stories within data sets. The transcriptions of these physical letters were kind of like a raw data point that we digitized. A sentence typed into a chat window is a data point. A Facebook sticker sent across the ether is a data point. And they're all, it shouldn't be a surprise, even though a lot of people find it surprising that there is emotions in data. But at their core, data are kind of like interviews done on a massive scale over and over and over again, right? Someone asks a question of a certain person, or a set of questions, and then they ask these questions of another person. The same can be thought of from algorithms, because an algorithm is basically essentially a question that a coder wrote, and you respond with your behavior. You respond by typing in a chat. The coder asks, how often does this person log into their Facebook? The person responds with a behavior, and then it gets logged into a database. And so if you think about it, our behavior drives these data sets. and they're there for us to mine. So are there questions that we can ask of these data sets that reveal something about our behavior, that reveal something about our truth? Maybe in a way that we don't even know exists. There's a lovely book that Christian Rudder, the co-founder of OkCupid, wrote called Dataclysm, Who We Are When We Think That No One Is Watching. That data is kind of who we are when we think no one's watching. But someone wrote a question through the algorithm, and we answered through our behavior. And I think there's a very untapped potential for finding those stories within that data. And I think you saw the code. It only took one page of code to actually extract that into a spreadsheet that we could analyze and look into. And I think if there's one thing that I want you guys to take away from this is that, A, you can always come to us and pitch stories for the series, but also other stories, because Al Jazeera is awesome. But also, I want you to think about what you can find, what queries you can ask of data sets to find actual stories. Because again, human behavior and human stories drive these data sets. And if you know what to ask, and if you can find a coder or someone like me to ask the right questions of these data sets, you can find stories that probably no one else can. Even the people who wrote those chats will not remember what they wrote a year ago. I barely remember what I ate like yesterday, so I don't know. I'm gonna wrap this up with like some of the suggestions from StoryCode, because they wanted to know lessons learned. The way we wanted to do a Loving Long Distance at the beginning, and it was kind of a pet project that was brought into the transmedia world at first, was we wanted to make an app that taps into your Facebook data. The way you can do that through Facebook is by going into, or like taking advantage of their API, which is a data stream. If you allow me access to that data, I can do certain things and extract that data and do interesting apps with that. Facebook used to allow for you to do that and look into your relationships with another person. Now, because of privacy issues, they restricted that access to just your data. What we wanted to do was to make a timeline of your communication with a specific person so that you can go back in time to reread your most precious moments. That died when Mark Zuckerberg was like, we will not allow you to do that with our data. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons, like proprietary data, like with private companies amassing more and more data of you, they also have a lot more control over what they will offer you and what they will not allow you to use. And that's one of the constraints that we had to figure out. That doesn't stop us from having other people downloading the data and allowing us to sieve through it, but that's another question. Number 2, be flexible. Sometimes when you put something out on the web, you won't get the kind of response that you want, or maybe you'll get a different audience than you want. We had an interesting kind of lull when we first published the Hong Kong video, but then as Hong Kong woke up, we suddenly had a whole nother like tweet storm and so on, and people, and an audience on social that was interesting. People actually watched, the video was put onto a tweet, all 7 minutes of it, and people actually watched the whole thing. So you never know. Maybe meet people where they are, maybe meet people on their phones, meet people on Facebook. Also, we posted a video on Facebook and it actually got some good traction. We had a creative call to action where we asked people to give us stories about themselves. And they gave us some interesting stories, but it was interesting because they were stories from France or stories that were from people who were mostly in a loving relationship with someone who, I don't know, worked for the UN or something like that. And it was an interesting way into understanding, oh, okay, even though we're Al Jazeera America, we still have quite an international audience. Okay, and now I'm gonna open it up to questions.
Hi, my name's Ben. I really enjoyed your presentation. I like how you have lots of data to sort of lead you to new sort of understanding about different types of relationships. Mm-hmm. And it's like, what are some of the like lessons you may have learned from the specificity and then also the broad swath of data that wasn't possible without the affordances of like digital technology?
What do you mean?
Like, because if you having specific knowledge about a conversation or a relationship gives you a certain understanding of that relationship, yeah. But also having a broad idea of the type of relationship that it's happening, like the graph of the different types of chat rooms gives you a different type of understanding.
Right.
And like what types of lessons can we be learned by going very specific and also very broad that weren't possible before without using a digital technology like this?
I think it goes into like how I usually parse out different kinds of media anyway. I think video can be a beautiful way of understanding having an empathetic understanding of a story that's very emblematic of the larger issue, while graphics and charts are wonderful at giving you contextual understandings of a larger issue, right? And so you get this intellectual understanding through things like graphics, through that data, but you get a much more like, I can feel like how the other person is like feeling through these videos much more so than I can through like a chart. And so understanding the interplay between the two is important, because you want to also understand the larger issues underlying the individual story. So I've always seen them as yin and yang that kind of work together really nicely, but I wouldn't necessarily say that one is dominant over the other, because you kind of want to see what the story is and what the data can unearth. Something that, for example, Mike referred to was the data visualizations I did about emotional states, and that was the reason why I made those at that point in time is because, you know, when you go through a breakup, you feel like shit. And oftentimes you want to see the end of at the light of the tunnel. And so data analysis can do that. You want to see anomalies and trends. What is the overall trend of my sleeping pattern? So I looked into my sleeping pattern through GChats and like other stuff to see when I went to bed, and saw, oh, I actually I'm normalizing my sleeping pattern. And that's a way of looking forward and having an intellectual understanding about a very individual thing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.